Okay, so I'm gonna do a nice cylinder demonstration here for you. All right, so I've got 3 pounds of clay here, and I'm gonna turn this into a cylinder. We always start with cylinders because it's one of the more challenging things to throw, especially in the beginning. But once you get the details down of how to make a nice straight-walled cylinder, everything else all the rest of the throwing project should move through pretty smoothly. So our goal for this is to make a 6-inch tall cylinder with even walls and a flat bottom. So when I say 6 inches tall, we want to be about 3 inches wide. We can go wider than that. We just don't want to be more narrow than that. And when I say even walls and flat bottom, this whole bottom is nice and flat, and these walls from bottom to top are nice and crisp and even, and a nice rim on the top. And we'll talk more about that here in a moment, how to get some of those things. So first thing we have to worry about, we need to start being more conscious with how we wedge things. And for video purposes, I'm going to do this on this table, but you're always going to want to wedge on the concrete tables out there. The wheel heads aren't actually a very good surface for it, especially when you're starting out. And so this is kind of like when we talked about getting wedging for the slabs. Essentially I'm going to be using my right hand to push the clay down into itself and lifting it back up with my left hand. So it's kind of a smooth rocking motion. If I'm spreading the clay out or smearing it across the table, that's too much. If you can see there on my right hand, the clay is just kind of packing down on top of itself. This is just to get rid of air bubbles. Air bubbles, again, aren't going to cause us any problems in the long term. It's just going to give us a trouble when we're throwing. It'll feel like a little pebble inside of there. So the first thing we do is talk about how to put this on the wheel head. Actually, let's talk about the wheel head. So all the wheel heads are basically the same. It's a little bit different than what I have in here, but what you have out there, they're all basically the same. On your right side, you're going to have an on-off switch, and then you're going to have a switch that makes it go forward, neutral, and reverse. Forward is basically means counterclockwise. We're all going to be throwing with the wheel going counterclockwise. And then we have a foot pedal, and the foot pedal is what controls our wheel speed. If you press it a little bit, hold on. If you press it a little bit, it goes slow. A little more, it goes faster and faster, and basically faster in the very end. So it's a lot like a car pedal. One difference can be that I can take my foot off of it, and the wheel's going to keep maintaining a certain speed. Some people find that helpful when they're starting out, because there's going to be a lot of mechanism movements in your hand and your upper body. And to take the thought of your leg moving out of the equation, sometimes that can be helpful. And then we have the wheel head. The first thing we're going to do is what's called centering. And basically I want to, right now this is on the wheel head. It's near the center, but you can see how bumpy and wavy it is. Our goal is to get this to spin and make it look like there's no change in the surface. And be completely smooth and kind of roundish. So to start that, I'm just going to pack this into a ball. Because a round ball shape is going to be the easiest to work with since we want to make a round-like shape. I have about 3 pounds of clay here, although I would recommend you starting out with closer to 1 pound, just to kind of get the mechanics. To get to our 6-inch height requirement, you might need 2 or 3 pounds of clay. But before we can get that height, we just need to understand some of the basics. So if you can see on here, the wheel heads have a series of concentric circles, and that's really nice for trying to figure out how to center something. Because if I start with the clay over here, it's going to be really hard to put to the center of the wheel head. But if I am able to place it right in the center based on the lines, it's already much easier. So I want to make sure that I do that. And when I do that, it's really important that this is really secure to the wheel head. Sometimes you will see people reach back and throw down and smack this onto the wheel head as loud or as hard as they can. That mainly just makes a loud noise. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, try and put that, looks like that's pretty close to the center. And then to get started, I'm just going to, using the palms of my hand, just sort of smack this down to the wheel head. Like so. And again, it's off center. We can still, hopefully you can see that shaking happen, that variation in surface. That's what we don't want. But now I'm ready to start centering, and this isn't going to come off the wheel head. It's really important that it's pressed down really firmly. If water gets under there, it's just going to slide your clay off. So we want to be careful of that. So I'm ready to start centering. Tools we're going to need for this. We're going to need a bucket for water or some container for water, a small sponge, a wooden rib, potentially a needle tool, and the wooden knife tool. So here we go. So I'm going to put some water down. So at this point, now that the clay is on the wheel, I don't ever want to touch the clay unless the wheel is spinning. Centering is hard enough as it is, but if I'm touching the clay, like right now, if I'm like doing this sort of rubbing, smoothing thing, it's just going to ruin everything. If you're touching the clay while the wheel is not spinning, you're just going to mess everything up. So here we go. So now what we need to do is figure out how to get this even, get this centered. It looks like kind of like a half sphere is what we're going for. And so I'm just going to do two really specific things, one with each hand. And so with my left hand, I'm going to use this part of my palm, and I'm going to be pressing this in right here. So if I think of this wheel head as a clock, we have noon right here, 6 o'clock closest to me, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I'm over here at like 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, pushing in with my palm, just with this part. This part of my hand and my fingers are absolutely useless. Right now, this is a really firm spot. If you can see, that doesn't move a lot. This moves a lot here because of the way my wrist moves. And also, if I put too much pressure here, it's going to flex my wrist too far, and it's really going to hurt after a while. So I just want to be right up against this joint, and I don't need to overflex my hand that way. And that's going to help straighten up the side of this. One thing you're going to find is that the clay is going to be kicking back a lot, and it's going to be pushing your arm back. So it's really important that you take this left arm and wedge it up. I'm standing up, by the way, instead of sitting down, but I'm going to wedge my elbow into my side as much as I can so it doesn't, so the clay has to push me back, not just my arm. So now I'm going to use the bottom part of my right fist and press down. Now I'm just squeezing both of those together as firm as I can. If you can see, my fingers on my left hand are out here out of the way, because I really just want those 2 points of contact. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a centered piece of clay. We get rid of some of this extra at the bottom. And you want it to be moving much less. So again, I'm just going to put some more water down, get this a little bit more centered. If at any point the clay starts feeling dry or sandy, or your hand feels kind of like it's burning, you need more water. More water is kind of the catalyst for all of this happening. The clay will dry out your hands and vice versa way too fast, and the water and slip comes in as like a lubricant to help everything work much better. So you can't really see it here, but my water bucket, I don't really change it out very much. And that's so that it becomes more of a slip than water, because slip's going to be much more slippery than water, and therefore helpful in the throwing process. So I'm just going to put a little bit more down. And again, I'm pushing with this hand just in this direction. And notice that as I do that, the side's getting taller. See how this is only flexed about, let's call that 45 degrees. If I do this all the way back here like this, see this 90-degree angle up here on the top view? This is a really painful angle for your wrist. So you want to make sure that you're almost a little bit straighter. Then again, my fist is coming down at 4 o'clock. And I'm just going to push down until I get the shape that I want. Like so. And notice with my top hand, I'm not dead in the center. If I'm dead in the center, it starts making a little bit of a well inside. So I'm over here off to the side. You know, if I want to think about how I'm contacting the clay, I want to touch the clay as little as I can, as most effectively as I can. So just touching one part of the side and one part of the top. You know, So as I'm pushing down, I'm just pushing right here. And the reason I don't need to push everywhere is because the clay's spinning into my hand. So the more I touch, right now the clay's pushing into here. If I go over it, I'm gonna be kind of twisting the clay, and I don't want that. So it's just nice and smooth in one spot. And just like that, that's centered. And so this is one of the hardest aspects, one of the most necessary aspects of wheel throwing. Before we can really start to even make something look like a cylinder, we need to be able to center. And so again, I would practice this. I would just get, I'm going to end up giving you a bunch of clay tomorrow. And I would just make, a half dozen, 10, whatever you feel like, 1 pound ball of clay. Is just try and practice with this. Because the more you kind of have to, if you have to like get up and make clay every time or get a piece of clay every time, you're just going to lose too much time. And just having clay at the ready is really important. So next I'll talk about what the next steps are. Okay, so we're back and I've got my centered ball of clay and I'm ready to start turning it into something. So right now it's solid. All it could really do now is hold down some papers or hold a door open. But I want to be able to put something in. It's ideally, not ideally, but generally speaking, things made on the wheel are vessel oriented. They're going to hold something, be it a cup, a bowl, a plate, jar, what have you. So we need to take this solid object and turn it into some sort of vessel. In this case, it's again that big 6-inch cylinder. Again, you want to make sure that we're going to end up with this nice flat bottom, these nice straight walls. This cylinder is not in proportion. So my first thing I need to do is, now that it's centered, is I'm going to go ahead and open up the center, put a hole in the center. And again, I'm not going to do anything until the clay's spinning. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to orient my hands. I'm not going to do anything. I do have my sponge in my hand because at this next point I need to have potentially extra water. And so having it in my hand is really helpful. So I'm going to take my left thumb and I'm going to put this right in the center. And then with my right hand on top, I'm going to push this down. So right now as I'm doing this, all my left thumb is doing is standing still or holding still. My goal is for it to just be a tool while my right hand is actually what's using the force this down. Okay. So if you can see the inside there, now I have this kind of, almost like bowl-like shape, which is okay. It's not what we want, but it's kind of part of the process. So our walls are going to be about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Somewhere in that range. Even's more important than where that thickness is inside of that range. So first thing I need to do is see how thick my bottom is. Because if this gets too thick or too thin, well, if it's too thin, it's going to crack and be cut out. If it's too thick, it's going to crack. So we really want to be nice and even, again, 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to stab my needle tool right into the lowest part of the clay. And then I'm going to take one of my fingers and slide this down the needle tool shaft until I hit the clay. And now I can pull it out. And that is how thick my bottom is. So that's way too thick still. And that's closer to 3/4 of an inch. So again, I'm going to put my left thumb, get a little bit more water, left thumb down on the bottom and press down with my right hand. All right, so that's a much more appropriate thickness. All right, so my next step is right now I have this kind of V-shaped flower pot shape. Again, we want a flat bottom. Right now my flat bottom is only about 1 inch wide. So I'm gonna make this wider. So to do that, I'm gonna put my left hand back where it was while I was centering. But I'm not really gonna push any pressure on the clay. I'm more there just to kind of coddle it. So I'm gonna make sure there's enough water on it to make sure I'm lubricated. And then I'm gonna use my middle finger and my ring finger and place that at the bottom of that kind of slope where it starts to flatten out. And I'm going to take those two fingers and drag them across the bottom of the clay towards my left palm. And just one firm kind of smooth motion. So let me get the water out of there. And so now we have a much wider open bottom. We're right at about 3 inches. And so that's good. So I've got the opening that I want. I said we want these to be about a minimum of 3 inches wide. And so the bottom's where you start that. If we make this wider now, the whole cylinder is going to have to be wider. If we make it too narrow, well, it doesn't matter because it's under 3 inches. But if it's less than 3 inches, now we can make it wider, but just by opening it up more. Otherwise, it's too late. You can't. Once you start throwing the cylinder, you can't make it wider at the bottom. So if you can see, and I think you can, the bottom of this, interior of this, is not flat. There's a low spot, a high spot, a low spot, another high spot, and a low spot. And so our goal is, like I said, to make this flat. One, aesthetically, that looks good. This doesn't look good. But also, clay's soft. You've noticed with things, clay doesn't always like to do what we want it to do. If we just leave this like this, it's probably going to crack. And so we need to compress it to make it not want to crack. So compress it, smooth it out. And if I don't do this now, when I have a cylinder that's 6 inches tall, I'm not going to be able to reach my tool down in there to do that effectively. So I'm going to use my wooden rib tool, and I'm going to use this shorter side. I'm going to use the shorter side, and I'm going to place this right at, again, think about the clock face. I'm going to place it right at 3 o'clock. And when I do that, I'm going to point this pointed end towards me. And what that's going to allow to do is going to allow the clay to smoothly go underneath it. Think about like a nice spatula spreading something. It's just going to smooth right to it. My tool's not going to move. The tool stays firm at 3 o'clock. The clay moves into it. If I hold it straight up and down or point it away from me, it's going to start digging clay out, and that's bad. So this is one of those things where compressing this is like, necessarily you can't really overdo it, but I oftentimes see people doing it too much. It's one of those where I'm just going to, again, start the wheel. I've got water in here and I've got this wet. I'm going to come to 3 o'clock and then just firmly press this down until I see it go flat. So 2 things have happened. 1, now my inside is nice and flat and smooth. 2, the benefit of this rib is that this 90-degree angle has made a mark right inside of there. And that's going to be really helpful when I start pulling here in a second. So this is compressed, and I've got about 3 inches of span or width in there. And so this is good. If this isn't 3 inches or more at this point, you need to open it up more. You need to flatten it out more. If you start getting this really small bottom that has kind of like a slope upwards, it's not going to count. It needs to be big and flat. And it'll make sense what I just said as you start doing it. I tell you it's wrong. So don't worry. I'm here for that. So our next step, one thing, again, I talk about compressing clay all the time. So my next step is to compress this. This is going to be the rim. Right now it's way too thick to be a rim, but believe me, it needs to be compressed. And so to compress this, again, I water down or slip down. I'm going to take my index finger and my thumb on my left hand and gently press against the top, and then use my index finger on my right hand and gently press down. So right now, if you can see, I'm just holding still, just barely pressing into the surface. So nothing's changing. I'm just tightening up, and I can let go. So now I'm ready to start pulling. So again, if you've gotten this far, great. This is going to be the next part that's like really frustrating. Really frustrating. It's going to take a lot of practice to get pulling down and get it down efficiently. Everyone's going to go through it most likely, so don't worry. Ask for help if you need it. It's going to be hard. You're going to get frustrated with this, so you're just going to have to stick with it. That's the only way you can get through this part. So be warned, it's going to be frustrating. And the even more frustrating part is I'm going to make it look really easy. I'm going to make it look really easy. So it's going to be way more harder. So just setting you up for that in advance. So I'm going to put more water down because, again, definitely need water. And I'm going to use my left hand on the inside and my right hand on the outside. I'm over here at 4 and 5 o'clock, give or take. And my left hand is going to be pushing out. My right hand's going to grab it. My right hand's going to be a little lower. It's going to grab it. They're going to squeeze together. And as I start squeezing all in one fluid motion, I'm just going to lift my hands and the clay up. Sounds simple, right? So like I said, the clay, I put a nice 90-degree angle inside of here at the very bottom, and that's helpful because now I know where the bottom is. If you leave that sloping curve in there, you're never gonna get a good spot to start pulling, and that's really important. Because out here, I can get my fingers all the way down to the wheel head, and that's where I want them to start. Remember how I said my right hand's a little lower? Well, here we go. Now it's starting down here at the wheel head, and my left hand is inside on this little clay base, like clay inside, and so now it's naturally at a different height. And so, again, I'm gonna squeeze with my left hand, I'm gonna push out, squeeze in with my right hand, bring them together and start coming up. And then just very gently, as I get to the top, I'm gonna stop and let go. Now we've got the beginning of the cylinder. I'm gonna come back and recompress this again. After every pull that I make, I'm gonna compress this. All of the strength of our, again, I didn't change the shape really, I'm just tightening it up. So all of the strength of our vessels are coming into this rim. If our rim isn't strong, you're just gonna get a big crack down the side of something really nice. So most people say it'll take about 3 pulls to move all of the clay that you want. Again, more water. And so I'm gonna push out with my left hand and lift up with my right. And just very evenly move those up together. If you can see on my right hand, my left thumb and my right hand are touching together there at the top. And that's so that I know that my hands are moving up at the same speed. It's really important that my hands are moving up, same speed. I'm gonna compress, moving up at the same speed. And you'll notice as I'm going, if you can see, I don't know how well they're picking up, these are what are called throwing lines. And they're nice and tight and together. If you get these big lines on the side, it means you might be pulling a little too fast. And that's gonna be a hard part for you to figure out. Based on how hard you're squeezing and how fast or slow your hands are moving up the side is going to determine how fast your wheel head needs to go. So I throw kind of slow. Some people throw fast. But if your hands are moving fast, the wheel head should move fast. If the wheel's moving slow, your hand should move slow. Because if you want to think about it, every time your hand's moving up, it should have done a full rotation on the wheel. And I'll just stop right below the top. And I'll come in and compress. Add some more water down. And so if you can see what's happening here at the top, it's becoming a little bit wider than it is everywhere else. So this is gonna happen. The clay is naturally gonna wanna flare out on you as you're throwing because of centrifugal force or centripetal force. I always get them confused. But basically, the more you spin the clay, the faster you spin it, the more it's going to flare out into a bowl shape. To counteract that, I can take 2 wet palms and just very gently down below where it's still a little bit more narrow, and then just sort of squeeze in everywhere and lift the clay up, just like so. So it made the top a little uneven, but the shape looks, or the verticality is a little bit nicer. So I'm going to do another pull. One thing I'm gonna do first though, if you can see, no longer, originally I had a nice like vertical spot at this side wall here. Now I've got this little ramp of clay. This ramp of clay makes it really hard to start at the bottom. So I'm gonna use my wooden knife tool. And I'm gonna, see how I'm holding it like a pencil? Holding it like a pencil like this. My hand knows how to hold a pencil. If I hold this tool way back here, I have no control over it. It's just going to bounce around and be really ineffective. But if I choke up all the way on it, it's going to be really easy to hold like a pencil or a pen and have control over it. So here where it starts to form that hill, I'm just very slowly going to move my tool down until I hit the wheel head. And once I've done that, I'm just going to press down, slowly spin the wheel, and that's just going to scrape everything up. like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and do one more pull. Probably won't have to do very much. Let's see where our height's at. We're at 7 inches. So I'm an inch taller than we need to be already. So that's good. I'm going to compress one more time. And if you can see from where I was collaring that clay. Okay, a little bit of technical difficulties there. Let's see. What was I saying? So I need to trim this. This is a little uneven for my taste. You know, see that little waviness happening? We don't want any wavy happening. So I need to cut that. So I'm going to grab my needle tool. This is going to be the most efficient tool for this. It's just a little needle. I don't want to use a knife, would never work. I mean, never is a strong word, but this would be ridiculous. So again, I'm going to try and hold that as close to my hand as I can. You know, I just need a little bit of my needle to come out. You know, I'm not way back here on it because this is just going to flop around. We don't want a floppy needle tool. It's going to choke up on it until I have just a little bit coming out. And so as I pierce through this, I don't want to go, you know, hard 90 into it. I'm going to come in again at an angle so the clay kind of swoops into it. I don't want to pierce because then it's going to bounce. It's all about that swooping into it. Let the clay come to the tool. The tool doesn't need to come to the clay. So I'm just going to go a little below my low spot and just gently let the needle tool slide through. I don't need to do it in a matter of seconds. There we go. One little ring. And now we're much flatter, or at least more even at the top. And I'm going to compress this. Right now it's too flat, so I can just pinch it a little bit so I can have a nice rounder edge. There we go. All right, and so if you can see on the top there, it might be kind of dark and hard to tell, but there's a bunch of water in the bottom. I need to get all of that water out. If this was something I was going to keep, that water would cause that to crack and ruin your piece. And so don't leave any water in the bottom. Okay. So I've got that out. Now I'm ready to clean up the outside. So I talked before about these throwing lines. I want to get rid of those. I want these to be nice and as vertical as possible, as straight as possible, you know, to get all the credit that we need for this. So again, I'm going to be pushing, similar to throwing or pulling. I'm going to push out slightly with my left hand, and I'm going to use this long side of my rib on the outside. It uses kind of like a straight edge. The main thing I want to know is, again, I'm going to use this at an angle so the clay kind of flows into it. But I also want to make sure that that point is pointed away, because if I'm using this on the side, that point's going to get caught. So just very gently pulling or pushing out. You can see those throwing lines go away. A little bit of a flat spot in here. All right, so there's our cylinder. Wipe my hands off. So we have a final height of about 7.5 inches. Again, for our projects, we're looking for 6. I went a little bit above. This is 3 pounds of clay. All right, so we're gonna take these off the wheel head differently than we normally would take something off the wheel head. We'll talk about that later. But basically, just looking at this cylinder, we can't see a whole lot about it. So all of the cylinders that we make, that you're gonna show me, we're making 10, by the way, 10 6-inch cylinders, even walls, flat bottoms, 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch thick. I need to see all of them. I need to see the innards of it. I need to see the insides. I need to see that wall thickness. Sometimes I can just look down and see, but it's much better for the learning process to cut them in half. As hard as that can be, these aren't things we need to keep, and we can just reuse the clay. There's no need to be attached. We're just trying to learn. So I'm going to take my wire tool. I'm going to tighten it up in my hand, kind of like dental floss. Take it to the wheel head, pull through, and I'm going to stop about halfway. And once I'm halfway, I'm going to come straight up. And I can pull this side away. And now we can see this is what we're talking about with even walls. It was straight up and down, but now my hand's squeezing it. We got a nice flat bottom, even walls. Same thickness all the way around. We just need to do this 10 times. 6 inches tall, at least 3 inches wide. So if you're in the studio in the evening or the weekends and you make these, just keep both halves. You'll have to cut them in case they dry out, but just keep the two halves together. It'll keep them stronger from waiting to fall over. And I'll check them during class. So that's all. So just keep rewatching this. It's not going to make it. Keep watching, practicing. I'll leave this out in the other room for you to see. And one thing I'll note that I'll be coming around towards the end of the class saying is this really important. This looks a little messy here because this is the wheel I use in my office, in my studio, that no one else uses. Wheels we're using are being used by many other people. So it's really important that they're clean, if not cleaner than the way that you found them. So we take splash pans off. Any clay or slip in the splash pans can go into the reclaim bucket. Everything needs to be wiped down with a sponge, and it's probably not a bad idea to sanitize everything. The board and the stool can go back on the wheel, the pedal can go up on the table, and then we'll be good. See you then.